Some believe I'm right, many believe I'm wrong. But I want to show you that I think Tutankhamun was murdered. Let's go back to Akhenaten. Remember the holy city in the desert that Akhenaten had founded? And Akhenaten died after 17 years of ruling. And I didn't answer the question, well, who becomes king next? How does that happen? Akhenaten dies. As far as we know, there are only 2 royal people alive after Akhenaten dies. His wife, Nefertiti, died before him. He had 6 daughters. There are only 2 royal people alive at the death of Akhenaten. One is a daughter. Ankhesenaten is her name. Ankhesenaten. Something like causing the Aten to live. Ankhesenaten. The other royal person alive is an 8-year-old boy. His name is Tutankhaten. Now, I haven't mentioned him. Tutankhaten is probably, most Egyptologists agree, probably the son of Akhenaten, but his mother isn't the famous Nefertiti, the great wife. Akhenaten had 2 wives, and little Tutankhaten's mother is a woman named Kia. So he would be the half-brother of the little girl who's alive. There are 2 royal kids alive, Ankhesenaten and Tutankhaten. They are the only royal children alive. Now, think about it. The girl, her mother was Nefertiti, the great wife. Her father was the king. She has the pure royal blood through her veins. The boy is half royal. The father is the king. He is the only candidate to be the king. He's the only royal male alive. So he is married to his 9-year-old sister. They're roughly the same age. He is married to his 9-year-old half-sister and becomes king of Egypt. This almost everybody agrees on. Now, remember, they're living at this holy city in the desert. And the pharaoh who started this whole religion is dead. The religious leader is dead. What do? Do you go on with worshiping the Aten when your leader's dead? Or do you go back to the old religion? Now, the king, who's an 8-year-old boy, can't make this decision.
Oh my goodness. Wow. Okay. Wow. See, I've always said for a long time now that you learn more outside of school than you do in school. You know, they tell you about Cleopatra, they tell you about King Tut, but they don't explain why these people exist. They don't explain the relationship of these people, you know. But they'll tell you about George Washington and how many slaves he had, and Thomas Jefferson, and writing the Declaration of Independence. But they don't tell you that after him and his partners got through that day, they went home and beat on their slaves. Probably woke up early in the morning beating on slaves. Man. So anyway, first of all, hello. How are you today? The Akhenaten. Oh man, don't make me say this name because y'all know I always mess it up. Queen Nefertiti's husband has 2 living children. The rest of them are dead. 2 living children. One is his daughter by his wife, the queen, and one is his son by his mistress. Well now, okay. So this was, man, this was part of the social norm for the king to have a mistress. The wife knew about it. So as long as he didn't put her above the queen, then she accepted it, and I I don't agree with it, but I understand why they did it. The mortality rate, the life expectancy back in those days, man, the more kids you had, the more heirs you had. You didn't know if that one child was going to make it or not. So you had to plant your seed everywhere you could. Nowadays, you got guys out here planting seeds, and they ain't trying to take care of them seeds. Back then, it was imperative that you knew who was going to succeed you after you passed on. Whether it was natural causes or whether you died in battle, you had to know. It had to be a blood relative. So rather than knocking up the queen all the time and risk losing all your children, you get the queen pregnant a couple of times, get you a side chick and knock her up a couple of times. And I'm pretty sure some kings had two side chicks. So, hey, it is what it was. Those were the times. But nowadays, through modern medicine, a lot of stuff can be prevented. So, there's no need to have a side chick. She's just a real straight up dog. Or, and I heard rumors. I can't verify this. I can't prove it, but I've heard rumors that you have women that get paid to have babies for other women. I don't understand it, but okay. Alrighty then. So, King Tut, the boy king, is married off to his half sister for the sake of king and country. That don't have a bad ring to it. Huh. Anyway, on with the show.
There must have been discussions about what do we do? Do we move out of this place? Do we go back to Thebes? Do we do this? In the end, they gave up the new religion. They packed up. They deserted the city. They moved out of this wilderness in the desert, the city in the desert, and they moved back to the capital, Thebes. Not only did they move, but little Tutankhamun, the new king, changes his name to Tutankhamun. He's changing his name to show that it's the old religion coming back. And the girl, she changes her name to Ankhesenamun. So these two children, Ankhesenamun and Tutankhamun, move the religion back to Thebes. Surely they're not making the decisions. Somebody's making it for them. The best bet is the vizier, an older man named Aye, and he is calling the shots. And they move back to Thebes. Okay, so imagine these two kids, 8 and 9, moving back to this big city. They've never seen it. They've lived at this holy city with their father. But they're going back to Thebes. Now, back to my murder theory, that Tutankhamun was killed. Let's start with the body of the victim. We have the mummy, as you know, of Tutankhamun. It was discovered in his intact tomb by Howard Carter. The mummy was in a bad state. It was very, very poorly preserved. Let me tell you why. At the time of burial, there was a ritual where magical oils were poured over the body. Those oils had worked over the thousands of years to destroy the body. When they finally came to the body, remember there were 3 coffins, one inside the other, and the body is finally inside a gold coffin. The body was stuck to the bottom of the coffin by the oils. tried everything to get the body out. They brought the coffin into the sunlight and hoped that maybe it would soften up the oil. It didn't work. Eventually, and this was never published in the official report, the mummy was sawed in half and chiseled out. That's how they got the body of Tutankhamun out. So the body was in very poor condition. You see, in the 1920s, nobody realized that a mummy was really a treasure. Nobody realized that it contained information. DNA hadn't been thought of. So they really weren't careful with the mummy. I mean, think about it. If a royal throne, if the golden throne of Tutankhamun had been stuck in oil, you think they would have sawed it in half? Never. But the mummy was not cared for well. So, it's a damaged mummy. Anyway, some things were learned. They learned for sure that the boy king had died at the age of 18 or so. There are various ways you can tell. One way is by when the molars erupt. That can be checked. They also can learn by the ends of the bones, called the epiphyses. As you get older, the epiphyses, the ends of your long bones, your thighs, your arms, they harden. They cease to be cartilage and they become real bone. They could tell by that Tutankhamun was about 18 years old when he died. So he was a boy king. Became king when he was 8, ruled for about 10 years, and dies at the age of 18 or so. That's for sure. The objects in the tomb, of course, give us an idea of his life. You know, it's hard to reconstruct a life when the records aren't there, but it tells us a little bit. They found a chest which contained beautiful jars with the lids of Tutankhamun, a little portrait of Tutankhamun on top, that contained his internal organs. From mummification, when his mummy was preserved, they took out the internal organs and put them in these little jars, little coffinettes, putting them inside, preserving it, right? So you can tell. But also, there were other things inside the tomb that were real surprises. To me, the most interesting. When they started going into other rooms in the tomb, and they were small rooms, they found 2 little coffins, miniature coffins, about 2 feet high, less. No name on them, just little coffins. And when they started opening the coffins, there was another little coffin inside, beautifully presented. Inside that looked like a little bundle, a little mummy, inside each one of the 2. And inside the 2 little coffins were fetuses, human fetuses, 2 little girls. One probably about 8 months old, the other about 5 months old. They were probably miscarriages of Tutankhamun's young wife, Ankhesenamun. Right? So they had tried to have children, 2 little girls, but they didn't live. It was a big surprise. Nobody knew anything about this.
Wow. So wait a minute, you telling me that as soon as she hit puberty, they told these 2 kids they had to hurry up and start making babies? That's just, oh my goodness. Whew. I don't know what to say about that one, y'all. I knew they was into some, the Egyptians was into some crazy stuff, but they ain't. So, you got the new king, the boy king, and his wife trying to have kids, and it don't go so well. I mean, any parent would be sad to find out that the child is not gonna make it. But to be that young, to be a teenager, and go through that, is, and then you know they have a strong tendency to mummify everything, even pets. I don't know if I would want my unborn child to be mummified if they were born, if they were given birth to and they didn't make it, they didn't survive. To have this small, man. You know what, let's just get through this episode.
I looked at those mummies, the fetuses, little fetuses. They were lost for many years, and they were found at Qasr al watching, looking at these little fetuses. It was very sad. It was a very sad thing. But anyway, we learned a little bit about Tutankhamun's life, but not enough from the tomb. But in the 1960s, there was going to be another examination of the mummy, a more scientific one. The mummy was going to be x-rayed for the first time. And x-ray equipment was brought into the tomb of Tutankhamun. Tutankhamun's mummy, a lot of people don't know this, is still inside the tomb in the Valley of the Kings. Even when tourists go into the tomb, you don't see the mummy. It's inside the sarcophagus. It's inside. Because his mummy was the only one ever found intact in its tomb, they decided that it ought to be left there. So Tutankhamun still rests in his tomb in the Valley of the Kings. And they didn't want to bring it out either. So x-ray machine, a portable x-ray machine, had to be brought in. And Professor Harrison, a professor of anatomy, was in charge of the x-raying. So Tutankhamun's mummy was first x-rayed in the 1960s. Now it's interesting what they learned. First of all, it confirmed he was about 18 when he died. Now, remember I said this lecture is going to be about my theory that he was murdered. It's this autopsy that first led me to think of murder. Let me say why. I was watching a TV show, a special about Tutankhamun. And I'm not too interested in Tutankhamun at that point, just kind of watching it because it's Egyptology. And they had old footage of the anatomist, Dr. Harrison, talking about the x-ray of Tutankhamun, right? And he had an x-ray of the skull of Tutankhamun on the screen. And he said, pointing to a little kind of a spot where it looked like there was a bump or something like that, a darkened spot on the x-ray, he said, and I'll quote it, "It could have been caused by a hemorrhage under the membranes overlaying the brain in this region. It could have been caused by a blow to the back of the head, which in turn could have caused death." So Harrison looked at this x-ray and said, you know, it looks like he could have been killed by a blow to the back of the head. Now, Harrison wasn't sure that it was a blow to the back of the head. It's not quite clear. But what I want to stress is, he said, could have been a blow to the back of the head that may have caused his death. That's not murder. Could have fallen off a chariot, anything could have happened. But it's a start, and you'll see why I come to the murder theory slowly. You know, the x-ray of Tutankhamun's skull can tell you a lot. Not just about how he died, but how he was mummified. If you look at the x-ray of the skull, at the top of the skull, you will see what looks to be a very thick bone, like the top of his head is really thick. That's not a bone. And if you look at the back of the head, you'll see the same thing. It looks like a super thick skull. That's what the x-ray revealed. That's not a bone either. It tells me exactly how Tutankhamun was mummified. At the time of mummification, the brain is removed because it will rot, it will decay. And it's removed through the nose, a piece at a time. It's a long story, I won't go into it now. But after the brain is removed, Tutankhamun is lying on a table. Imagine the corpse is spread out on a table, and the head is kind of leaning on the back of the table, looking skyward, so to speak, up at the ceiling. They then poured resin, hot tree resin, through the nose, into the brain case, into the cranium, to cauterize the area. So what happens is, it pools at the back of the head, solidifies, and that's what the x-ray is showing us. That resin solidified at the back of the head. Then they moved the head off the table, so that the chin is pointing towards the ceiling. They poured more resin in, and then it goes to the lowest point, which is the top of the head now. It's hanging off the table. So by looking at the x-ray, you can say, this is how they mummified Tutankhamun. So the x-ray can show us quite a bit. But it's not murder. There also, by the way, in the x-ray, you can see a loose bone floating in the cranium. And some people thought, oh, maybe that's where the blow to the back of the neck came. No, that's not where he got the blow to the back of the head. That's a bone that was probably maybe lodged by the mummification people, the embalmers, when they were embalming him. It's much after the death. We can tell it's post-mortem. Because otherwise it would be stuck in the resin if it happened before and then they poured in the resin. No, that's what we call in the murder mystery business a red herring. It kind of throws you off the trail. No. So the x-ray is not really why I'm saying he was murdered. No. It's what got me thinking about it. It may be a blow to the back of the head, but what really leads me to think that Tutankhamun was murdered is the circumstantial evidence. You know, The physical evidence never proves murder. Even if you find someone with a bullet in the brain, doesn't mean he was murdered. And it's the same with a blow to the back of the head. It doesn't mean he was murdered. You always have to look at the circumstances surrounding the physical evidence. And that's when I thought about murder. Harrison, the anatomist, didn't know much about Egyptology, didn't know the circumstances under which Tutankhamun lived, that these were strange times, his father was a heretic pharaoh. He didn't know that. But when I started to think about, blow to the back of the head, and then the circumstances, that's when I thought about murder. And let me present the circumstances. I think the circumstances are absolutely remarkable, unique in the history of Egyptian civilization. Tutankhamun dies suddenly at the age of 18. We know it's sudden. He's buried in a very small tomb. Very small. It was a hasty burial. They had to get things together. Only 70 days for mummification. The whole ritual took 70 days. So everything put in that tomb had to be prepared within 70 days. Right? So it's a very hasty burial. He dies suddenly. He leaves a widow, Ankhesenamun, his wife, who's about 19. Now, remember, when they were married, they were the only two royal people alive. The only two. She is now the last member of the royal family. She is the last member of that great family going down from Hatshepsut and Tutmosis III and Amenhotep. She is the only surviving royal person. Right? What does she do? She writes a letter the likes of which no one has ever seen. She writes a letter to the Hittite king. Now, let me explain. The Hittites, they ruled the area which is modern Turkey. The Hittites are one of the traditional enemies of Egypt. They've been battling it out for a long time. These were not friendly relationships. And Ankhesenamun writes a letter to the Hittite king saying, "My husband has died. I have no sons. They say that you have many sons. Send me one of your sons, and I will marry him and make him king of Egypt." Now think about that. That's like the British writing to Hitler and saying, "Come on over." She is writing to the Hittite king, the enemy, saying, "Send me a prince, I'll marry him, and make him king of Egypt." Unheard of. Absolutely unheard of.
Okay. That is unheard of. But I just thought about something. I was looking at was it the History Channel or no, I think it was a PBS special. It had to be the History Channel or either this other documentary, biblical documentary, and it was talking about the Hittites. And part of the story, man, I wish I could remember. I'm gonna have to check that out. Part of the story was that this king had received a letter from Egypt saying that they needed a king, and the queen wanted him to wanted his help, and wanted to send one of his sons. And if I can remember correctly, he ended up sending the son, but the son gets killed. Oh, man. Hopefully I can remember it. I'm gonna look for that video, and I'll post it in the comments, in the description. But yeah, see, you get bits and pieces of information throughout life, and then at some point somebody says something, or you see something, or you hear something, and it makes you recall that other piece of information. So then you end up saying, "Oh, okay, well, wait a minute. If this happened then, and that happened before that, now it makes sense." It's one of those moments where you put the two pieces of the puzzle together and you're like, oh, okay, it didn't make sense before because it was just that one piece. But now that you joined that other piece of information that you just got, now it makes sense. So now it makes sense to me. The story I heard about the Hittites, the other person, the queen in that story from Egypt was King Tut's wife. But that's not the way they explained it. Just just the observation, personal observation.
I am afraid. Now she's the queen of Egypt. What is she afraid of? And aren't there eligible suitors in Egypt? Isn't there someone she can marry? Well, the letter has one more detail in it. She says, "Never will I marry a servant of mine." Now, a servant of mine means a commoner. It sounds like, for some reason, this 19-year-old widow is afraid, being forced to marry a commoner, right? Who's doing that? Anyway, the Hittite king did not believe the letter. It was so bizarre. Just couldn't believe it. He sent an ambassador to Egypt. Said, check it out, see if it's true. The ambassador came back and said, yes, it is true. Said it is true. So finally, the king sends a prince. The Hittite prince comes to Egypt. Now, we have the Hittite records of this. We don't have the Egyptian records. We have the Hittite archives. And the Hittite prince was murdered on the borders of Egypt before he entered the country. Now, that Hittite prince didn't come by himself. He came with a bodyguard, an entourage. This is a prince who's going to become king of Egypt. For him to be murdered, it isn't like a roving band. No. This had to be almost like an official, government-sponsored hit. Right? And the question is, who did that? Now, what happened to Ankhesenamun? Right? It's an interesting thing. The walls of Tutankhamun's tomb give us a clue. It's as close as we're ever going to get to knowing what happened. It's almost like a photograph taken 33 centuries ago. The walls of Tutankhamun's tomb were hastily painted. They're not carved. You had to do it quickly, 70 days. But they show the burial of Tutankhamun. They show Tutankhamun on a sled. They didn't use wheels in ancient Egypt much because they go into the sand. Being pulled on a sled by the palace officials. There are 10 officials with white headbands on, sign of mourning. And they're pulling Tutankhamun to that tomb. But you know who's not one of those officials? The old vizier who was calling the shots, who was making the decisions. Aye. He had been with them all the time. He's not there. If you want to find Eye on the tomb walls of Tutankhamun, there's another scene. There's another scene. And what it shows is Tutankhamun as a mummy. He's dressed like Osiris. He's in white. He's wrapped because he's now Tutankhamun Osiris. He's with the god of the dead. He is the god of the dead. He's going to resurrect. And I, the vizier of Egypt, the advisor to Tutankhamun, is wearing a leopard skin. And in his hand, he has an instrument. It's an odd-shaped instrument. It's called an adze. It's a woodworking tool, really. It's a wooden handle with a metal end. And he is taking this implement, and he is touching it to the mouth of the mummy. It's the opening of the mouth ceremony. He is giving breath to the mummy so it can speak in the next world, and so it can eat in the next world, and so it can say magical spells to resurrect in the next world. So I, the vizier, wearing the leopard skin, which is a sign of a high priest, he's acting as the high priest, is giving life to Tutankhamun. But that's not all I is wearing. If you look carefully, on his head, he has the crown of the king of Egypt. I has become king of Egypt. And above his head is a cartouche with his name in it. So we know that I is the one who succeeds Tutankhamun as king of Egypt. Now I is a commoner. How did I become king of Egypt? Now, this is a real puzzle. How did a commoner? But we know the rules, roughly, for how you become king of Egypt. And it's a good bet, that he married Ankhesenamun. He might be the commoner that she is so afraid of being forced to marry. Right? There's a little more evidence than that for that theory, though. In the 1930s, Professor Newberry, an Egyptologist, was looking through an antiquity shop when he found a finger ring, an ancient finger ring. It was at Blanchard's shop in Cairo. And Professor Newberry, of course, as an Egyptologist, could read hieroglyphs. It had the names of two people in a double cartouche, cartouches together. I was one of them, and Ankhesenamun was the other. It meant that they were married. So I became king of Egypt by marrying Ankhesenamun. Now, Newberry was really interested in this ring. He knew how important it was. And he wrote a letter to Howard Carter, who had discovered the tomb of Tutankhamun, was of course interested in this whole thing. And he said, "My dear Carter, I was in Blanchard's, and I found this finger ring, blue faience finger ring, and it has the cartouches of I and Ankhesenamun. It can only mean they were married." He says, "Have you been lately to the tomb of I in the Western Valley? Is Ankhesenamun present there?" See, everybody wondered, what happened to Ankhesenamun after she's afraid? And
Okay. All right. Well, I'm not a big fan of conspiracy theories, but this one might have some weight to it. I think he killed the boy. I think he's been lurking in the background. Uh he didn't like King Tut's father. Probably felt like he was a better man for the job. Probably felt like he was a better man, period. He should have married the queen at the time, Queen Nefertiti. So he sat back, he plotted, and the first chance he gets rid of the competition. So that means you got to kill the prince, the new king. So he sets it up. I don't think he killed him himself. He sets it up for King Tut to be killed. Then he marries his wife, and he takes over, does what he wants to do. But he's a commoner. He's a priest.